People say there is a first time for everything. A first kiss, your first car, the unrequited first love. However, what does this mean in the grand scope of things? Are firsts more monumental because they are the first, or do we get better with practice? Do we remember our firsts as more important than they actually were, holding on to that magical moment as a mark of our past and future selves? Do our firsts outshine what comes next? On A First Time for Everything, we will explore with our guests their firsts and how those impacted the seconds, thirds, and even countless times after. Is the first the best or merely the beginning? Or worse, was the first the last because it was so bad? We will dig into the recesses of our memories and consider whether or not a first was the start of something amazing or something we'd rather not remember. Come along with me, Juliet Rose, as I put our guests in the hot seat to analyze their firsts and how they defined who they became. I promise you're in for a fun, although maybe bumpy ride. Good evening, everyone. Welcome to another episode of First Time for Everything. I am your host, Juliet Rose, and today we are joined by Wayne Turmel, who is our guest tonight. And Wayne, why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and your books?
Oh, the wonder that is me. I am an old cishet white guy, originally from Canada, now living in Las Vegas. I have written 11 nonfiction books, and my 6th novel is coming out the 2nd of May. So very excited about that. Live in Las Vegas with my bride and Max the Wonder Dog. And that's about it. Other than that, I'm an open book. Ask me what you want.
Very good. So Las Vegas, do you ever go out to, is it Red Rock Canyon? Is that what's out there?
I have been out to Red Rock Canyon. It has been about a year. I just had my first knee replacement and I'm having the second this summer. So it may be a while before I get back out there. But yes, actually, one of the things about living here is I love the desert and I love hiking it and all that good stuff. And so the fact that I've been kind of hobbled has been less than ideal. See earlier statement about being an old guy, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I lived in Vegas for a while, and I was much younger as well, and we would go hiking out at Red Rock Canyon. But it's a hike for sure. There's no easy way to do it. So
there are, but they mock you for taking it. So I always wind up doing a tougher trail than I should.
Oh no! Don't let people mock you.
My daughter comes out from Chicago, and we get out there amongst the rocks and do our thing.
That's very cool. So I'm just going to close this real quick so I don't have any light seeping in. There we go. Much better. Well, very good. Well, it's so nice to meet you. And I'm really excited to learn more about your books, but I'm really curious. You said you have some nonfiction books. What type of nonfiction books do you have?
Man. You need to know a little bit about my background for this all to make sense. Sure. I spent the first 18 years out of high school doing stand-up comedy and touring North America and whatever. And at some point, it became clear I wasn't going to be a big star. So I had to run away from the circus and get a big boy job, and got a job in the training and development field, specifically around presentation and communication skills. So most of my nonfiction books are business-oriented, communication-oriented. The last 3 have been on virtual teams, virtual communication, remote work, which is, pays the bills and gives me a day job and all that good stuff so that I can write the stuff I really like to write. Don't tell my boss that. And so it's mostly been in the presentation space. I do have my first book that was non-work related was called A Philistine's Journal, An Average Guy Tackles the Classics, and was a bunch of essays about working my way through a series of books. And it was funny and silly, but mostly it's been business oriented and been very successful. The Long Distance Leader series of books has been very successful for us. But I always suspected, even after all that, that I'd never be a real writer. until I tackled a novel. And so there you go.
For sure. I actually started out in nonfiction as well. That's why I asked, because for my younger years, I wrote a lot of nonfiction. Mostly, I didn't write nonfiction books. I had one, but I wrote a lot of nonfiction articles and for magazines and newspapers. And then just really got the itch to dive into fiction. So I definitely appreciate that, because I understand what it's like to write, the difference between writing the two. One is factual and you have the knowledge and it's really important, and the other one is a little more fun, which, at least for me.
And nonfiction is so much easier to write. Oh my goodness, it's so much easier.
In what way do you think nonfiction is easier?
I guess because I have done it my entire career now, which is 30 years going on. I can arrange my brain. Nonfiction is very easy to outline. And rather than try to write a whole book, all I need to do is write 1,000 words on this. And then I can go to the next thing and I can write 1,000 words on that. Sure. And it's very easy to break that elephant into chunks. So much easier than it is when you're writing a novel.
Now, when you write fiction, are you a planner or a pantser?
I used to think I was a pantser, and as it turns out, I am just a really awful planner. I do plan. I'm just not terribly good at it. What I do is I usually know where the story starts and where it ends, and I have some idea of what the middle looks like, although it's vague, right?
Yeah.
So that starts me, and what I'll do is I actually plan about 3 or 4 chapters at a time, which eventually gets me there.
Yeah.
Right. So I'll do 3 chapters, and as I'm there, I'm kind of thinking about the next 3, because I know I need to get to here, and then I need to finish here, kind of, sort of. And while it doesn't look exactly like I plan it, it gives me a set of rails to run on.
Sure. Yeah, I'm a pantser, so I go with the same thing. I kind of have some ideas, but I'm also willing to just let those ideas go if something changes as I go along.
I kind of think about planning my writing the way I think about work, which is you have to have a plan and you have to know more or less where you're going, and you have to be willing to accept new information and adjust and swerve when necessary.
Exactly. I agree. I agree 100%. So let's go back in time a little bit and talk about when you first knew that you wanted to be a writer, and tell me about that. Like, what was it? When was it? How old were you? And then what did you dive into it?
The first time I knew I wanted to be a writer, I was probably 10. And we had a school assignment where we had to write a book. And I wrote basically a ripoff of a Perry Mason novel, because when I was a kid, my grandmother had collected all of the Perry Mason paperbacks. And so I had started a little ahead of schedule reading these books, and the TV show you could watch. And so I wrote this very high drama courtroom melodrama thing, which was, of course, a brilliant piece of staggering genius. Which I got an A.
Well, that's good.
Well, I think that's because I did a cover for it. None of the other kids did covers for their fabulous novels, so I think I got extra credit for that.
Okay, so that was when you first said, I want to be a writer. So when you grew up and you decided, I'm going to be a writer, I want to do this.
Yeah.
How did you set out to achieve that goal?
Well, the first thing I did was realize I didn't realize this until it was too late, which is that I had been lied to. When you look at movies and books and whatever, being a writer is incredibly glamorous. Your first book comes out and you do nationwide book tours, and you wind up, a couple of books later, you wind up living in a big house in the country with a fabulous library, and it's all lies. They just lied to us. But by that time, I was already sucked in. It's a little like marriage in that regard. And here I was. I always wanted to write. I kind of did it in stages. I started coming out of high school. I started writing stand-up, which was writing jokes. And then from there, it was kind of like, well, I'm probably never going to be Jerry Seinfeld. I should think about writing for TV or the movies. So I wrote spec scripts and I did that. And then, the real world interfered. I ran away from the circus and started writing nonfiction and started writing articles and chapters for books and stuff similar to you, and that kind of expanded into writing books. And then I started writing a novel and went back to short fiction and did that, and each thing kind of led inevitably to the other. And so here I am 6 decades into my existence. And it took me a while to call myself a writer. I think most of us go through this thing where, well, I'm an aspiring writer, or I'm this, or I'm that. And I realized one day I just looked at my Amazon page and went, there are 13 books on this page. I guess I'm a writer.
Absolutely.
And
Absolutely.
So I've started leading with that, but it's taken a long time.
Sure. And I think a lot of people do struggle with that. And I heard somebody say one time, there's no such thing as an aspiring writer. You're either writing or you're not. And that's really what I've lived by. So if you're writing, you're a writer. That's how it is,
Yes. And then, there is the embarrassing follow-up question, which is, oh, have I read anything you've written? Well, not unless you've broken into my house and looked in my drawer. And so at some point you have to say, well, I haven't, have you had anything published? The minute you have something published and you can go, yes, you can go here and you can read this thing, then you're a writer. The beautiful thing is that the person least impressed by you is you.
Oh, that's true.
Because people are so impressed, bless their hearts, people are so impressed that you wrote a book, even if they have zero intention of ever reading it. They're so impressed that you wrote a book that it carries far more cachet than it actually deserves.
It's true. I think in their mind, they also think you must live in a big house. And like I don't.
Well, they were fed the same lies we were. The problem is they still believe them.
Right. We learned the hard way. It wasn't true. They still believe it. So you said you were a stand-up comedian. Do you use comedy in your stories, in your fiction
constantly?
Stories?
Well, I mean, it's like this conversation. I'm talking about my books. I'm trying to get, and stuff spills out of my mouth, right? Right. Even my nonfiction has occasional smart aleck remarks. The thing about fiction is you're allowed to do that. And I've gotten more shameless about it because my first 3 novels were historical fiction. Which means the jokes and everything, if there are any, need to be appropriate to the time and the characters. Whereas with my last 3 novels, the Johnny Lycan series, he's a 30-year-old guy in modern day Chicago. Pretty much the filter is off and I can say whatever I want.
Exactly. Yeah.
And so there is a lot of humor, even though, Johnny Lycan is on the surface a noir detective thing with a swirling rage monster as the lead character. It's still pretty darn funny.
And what genre would you say those fall into?
If I could only do this like a real grown-up writer and just tell you one thing, it is, I guess, technically urban fantasy.
Okay.
Yes, the main character is a Lycan. He is a shape-shifting werewolf, but it is set in modern times. It is not traditional, silver bullets and whatever kind of lore. It's not straight out horror.
Nice. That's my kind of.
So it has to fit somewhere. I've been calling it urban fantasy noir because it has that, narrator noir film detective kind of feel to it.
Very nice. Well, it's funny because I'm mixed genre, so people ask me what genre I am and I just freeze because I don't know what to say. Like, can I give you a list?
The problem is there is a drop-down menu and you have to kind of choose whichever one it is. But I have created the unholy sin of not staying in my lane. So
Me too.
I have, I've written business books and I've written historical fiction and I've written this series of which I am very proud. But, the Venn diagram of people who care about how to do a good Zoom meeting with people who are interested in the life of an orphan in the Crusades, with people who are interested in werewolf detectives, is an extremely slim chunk of humanity.
It is. It is. And it's an interesting thing, though, because you have to say, am I restricting my readers or am I expanding my readers? So for me, I feel like I expand because when people come up to my table, I have a little bit of everything. They usually find something they want.
Yeah, that's very true. I mean, I love, now that I've got 6 novels, and I only display my novels when I do in-person book events. That's true. I mean, the problem for new writers is when you have one book and you put it out there, you don't have a lot of people coming by. The ones who do read all sorts of genres, which may not be yours. Exactly. And they may not, even if they read the genre, they may not be interested in your story. It's really hard to sell a book. When I've got my little rack of 6 novels up there and I can say, well, these 3 are historical fiction and these 2 are connected and this one's a standalone. And then there's the Johnny Lycan series, which is completely different. I cast a wider net. There's a better chance that somebody will want one of these. And then the hope is that if they enjoy your writing, they will want more of your writing and not be so dependent on genre. When I got the idea for Johnny Lycan, I mean, some of it was a shameless money grab. I mean, historical fiction sells, but not a lot, but nothing was selling like urban fantasy. And you need to have a series to kind of get people to do that. So it was, on one hand, somewhat cynical. But also I broke the cardinal rule, which is when they said, if you got to write one thing and you got to build up your audience. And I was worried about ruining my brand, and then I took a look in the mirror and said, what am I going to tick off both readers?
Right.
It's not like I have a big contract and a publishing company behind me saying, crank out more of this.
Right. Yeah, there is a benefit to not having a big readership because, you don't have to worry about,
you stop giving a hoot. Exactly. All kinds of doors open.
Exactly. And I'm the same way. Like I literally said, I'm going to write what I want to write. Like I just, whatever pops in my head, that's what I'm going to write. And I'm okay with that. So I think that, genre has become a big thing lately. Like I feel like people have really gotten into like whatever genre they think they want to read. And then they kind of lock into it. But people used to not be like that. I mean, when I grew up reading, I read whatever just appealed to me on the shelf. I'd walk up and that sounds good. That sounds good. It didn't matter what it was. It sounded good.
Well, there wasn't the marketing mechanism to drive you down a particular rabbit hole.
Exactly.
Right. Yeah. Like now, if you buy Johnny Lycan, you're going to get, hey, you might like the Dresden Files. Hey, you might like Sarah Taj's Misadventure series. You might like this or that. And you go, oh, yeah, okay, click. And before you know it, you've got 20 books on your Kindle and you're not looking for anything new for a while.
Right. I agree. So let's talk about, so you got into writing, you wrote the business books, you wrote, the books you've written. So let's talk about roadblocks and bad reviews. So what were some of the roadblocks you felt you faced? And then let's talk about the first time you got a negative review and how you handled that and how it affected you moving forward.
Well, okay. So roadblocks were simple. I knew nothing about publishing fiction, and I certainly knew nothing about the world of independent publishing. And, I got spoiled. I did my first novel and, queried a bunch of independent publishers who would take books without an agent. And I think the 5th one published Count of the Sahara. So I got very lucky. Okay. And then I got cocky. And because the Acra's Bastard and Acra's Orphans is set in the Crusades, it has a young 11-year-old as the the hero, they said, this book isn't for us. That's not our audience, which is perfectly fair. And I said, oh, well, I'm so good at this now. And you know, I'll just publish this myself.
Yeah.
And, you know, I think they're the best things I've written and have sold so little of them that I went crawling back to a small indie press, Black Rose Writing, for the Johnny Lycan series. So the roadblocks were really that I didn't know what I didn't know. And the roadblock now is I know exactly what I don't know. I can't be trusted. With Count of the Sahara, that was not the original title. They hated the title. They hated my cover idea. And they were absolutely right. I mean, I like collaborating in my nonfiction work. Some of it is self-published, but a lot of it is traditionally published. I love that collaborative, working with editors, working with people who actually know what they're doing.
Sure.
You know, it's kind of a radical thing. So that was that. As far as reviews, you got to remember, I've been performing live since I was 18 years old. I've had bad reviews. I've gotten the worst reviews you can have. And in stand-up, the audience will give you the review right to your face. You develop a pretty thick skin. So when Count of the Sahara came out, and I was very lucky, the first, and let's be honest, just author to author, the first 10 or 15 reviews you get are all fabulous anyway, because they're your friends and the people that you had read the book so that they could give you the review early, right? But when the honest reviews start coming in, it's a little tougher. And I would occasionally get a review, but the reviews that make me want to respond are the ones where I just think they're factually wrong. Like with Count of the Sahara, somebody said, he used this phrase, which is far too modern. They would have never used it in the 1920s. And so, you know, this guy doesn't know what he's talking about. And I wanted to go, do you know how much research I did to put that phrase in there, right? To know when the first recorded notion of that was? I didn't, because you never respond to those. But I also found out that bad reviews are helpful. I mean, one is, if it's a legitimate thing that they point out, you go, yeah. I mean, Count of the Sahara was my first novel. It, while I'm very proud of it, reads like a first novel.
Yep.
So that's legitimate. The other thing, and this is really important, and people don't understand this, because if they get less than 5 stars, they're ready to open a vein, right? Is one person's bad review is another person's advertisement. And by that, I mean, with Count of the Sahara, they said, I was expecting an Indiana Jones type archaeological adventure, and this isn't that. And so I give it 2 stars or 3 stars or whatever. Good. People who are expecting that shouldn't read this book. Thank you for giving me that notice.
Right.
It's the same with trigger warnings. You know, I always think about my friends that write horror, and like the worst reviews they've ever gotten. You know, this book is disgusting and it's horrible, and how can any decent person read this trash? Is the best advertisement you can get for that kind of book.
It is.
You know, hey, this freaked out your parents. Go read it.
Like, I got to read that now.
Yeah, exactly. And it will guide you. What it does is it weeds out people who aren't your audience.
Exactly. That's a good point.
And while I would like to think that everybody is my audience, they're not.
Right.
And so if a review steers somebody who is going to hate this book anyway away from the book, that's okay. Because it will also steer people to it. Hey, I really liked the snarky humor. Well, I like snarky humor. I don't usually read werewolves, but what the heck?
Exactly. Yeah. And I think that, you know, like, we look at reviews. If you look at reviews as simply knowledge shared, you know, it's fine. And like I said, I've seen horror writers that use those negative reviews to sell more books, because they're like, I got this 1-star review, and they share, and people are like, I got to read that book now, you know, and that's really good. And I think that's, you know, it's a very valid point that it's going to allow people that do like that type to follow it. And then people go, oh yeah, you know what? I don't like that. That's okay, because we don't need everybody to like us. We just need our readers that will be our followers to like us.
Yeah. First of all, hi, Anita. How are you? In the chat. Hi. And somebody put a comment in the chat. I've got to imagine in stand-up, no reaction in silence is much more disconcerting than boos or heckles. And no, because getting booed and heckled hurts. Silence is uncomfortable and it's awful and you sweat and you wish it was over. But boos, unless you are very skillful, they hurt. Um, the problem is both those things at least are feedback. Whereas when you write, somebody said, what's the biggest difference between writing a novel and writing for the stage? And the answer is, writing a book is like writing a joke and then waiting a year for the laugh.
That's fair.
Yeah.
All right. So kind of on that vein, I know you said you went through Black Rose for that, and then I think another publisher for that one. So do you handle a lot of your own marketing? And if you do, what are some of the things that you do for marketing?
You have to. Black Rose, when they launch a book, they have the people that they send it out to, and it's a good list, and they do the basics, right? Book funnel and some of those types of things. But you have to do your own, because 2 weeks after your book launches, they've got 2 more books coming out. And so you are your marketing person. What do I do for that? I have a website, wayneturmel.com. I interview other authors on that website, which means, of course, I leverage their networks. Unfortunately, they're as all wildly unsuccessful as me. It would be nice if Stephen King would put in an appearance, but what are you going to do? So I do network that way. I do Facebook. Fortunately, I am very, very lucky in that I enjoy this, right? I enjoy being interviewed. I enjoy talking to other authors, and hopefully people get a sense and go, he's an all right guy. Maybe I'll check out his book. What I feel really sorry for are the writers who I want to just write my books and magically the universe is going to find them. And it just doesn't work that way. You have to put yourself out there. You have to. I have not come close to figuring out the ads part of it all. I have not figured out Facebook and Amazon advertising. Matter of fact, 2 of my historical fiction books, I can't advertise on Amazon at all, because the first book in the series is Akra's Bastard, and that violates their robotic algorithm of what you're allowed to say. And so I literally cannot advertise that series on Amazon. What are you going to do? There was something I was going to say that was brilliant and it's gone. But yeah, here's what I tell new writers. And this is terrifying, because as the words come out of my mouth, I go, why do I even bother? Picture Amazon as a physical store. Globally, there are almost 4 million books a year published. So picture this stupidly enormous bookstore that every year adds 4 million books to the collection. Now you walk into that store and you go, I'm looking for a book. Okay. What are the odds, especially if you have 1 book or even 6, what are the odds that 6 out of 20 million, they're going to find your book? Well, I find it by genre. Okay. Are you talking to the people who read that genre? What's the book like? The best thing you can do is find comps. I am shamelessly riding Jim Butcher's coattails. On the cover of my book, it talks about how much it's like Dresden Files. Somebody explained once that Johnny Lycan is like methadone for Dresden fans. Like if you're starting to Jones out between episodes, this will tide you over. So you got to find out who reads the kind of stuff that you read, and then figure out how to get in front of them.
I agree. That's exactly it. And yes, you're right. Like it's if you're looking at Amazon and thinking, I'm just gonna put my book up there and hopefully people will find it, there's not a snowball's chance in hell, really,
Oh, no.
for them to find it. Like there just isn't. You have to put it out there. You have to talk to people. And it's not natural. I get it. For some people, it's really hard to do. Find a way, write a script, whatever it is. I'm an introvert. So for me, I really had to write a script, something that I could comfortably talk about and not feel, cheesy.
Yeah, it sounds trite, and it's true. I was at a book signing event with a group here in Las Vegas, and the gentleman sitting next to me was older than me, God help him. And he had written these books, and people would come over and they'd say, "What are your books about?" And I'd say, "Well," and I had a little spiel, right? These 3 are historical fiction. This one is this. These 2 are a series. These are the first 2 of a 3-part series about a detective who happens to be a werewolf, yada, yada, yada. A minute, done. What do you want to ask me? The poor guy next to me was just, well, they're quite amusing. And I could see his wife, God love her, she was sitting behind him. And every time he opened his mouth to talk about his books, I could see her cringing because he just didn't have that, what marketing weasels call your elevator speech. You have to be able to do that.
I like what Anita said. I just leaned into my natural dorkiness.
Dorkiness is great, but they need to know, oh, she's kind of a dork. That's kind of adorable. I like that.
Exactly. Yeah.
Right? You've got to put it out there. The most important thing you can do is have that 30-second, 1 minute. How do you describe your books?
Exactly.
That's the most important thing you can have.
And it's okay to practice it. I mean, I did for a long time. I joked around with Joe. I did an interview with him and I said, when I first used to do this, people come to the table and they'd be like, "Are these your books?" And I'd be like, "Yeah." That's where it ended.
Well, clearly they're in front of me. Obviously, they're my books.
I did sell very new books. So I had to learn to say, what do I say when people come up? And so I created a script. And that worked for me because it made it easier. And then we can veer off and talk about other things, but like it gives me a starting point. So yeah, it's really important to find your voice before you sit in front of a group of people looking at your books.
Absolutely. And so, so you do your pitch, and then the next thing you say is, "What do you normally read?" And shut up.
Yep.
Well, I usually read nonfiction. Really? Well, this book is based on a real life person. Well, I usually read this. Oh, you might enjoy it. You can make the connections. But you do a very short, tight pitch, shut up, or ask them, what do you normally read? What are you looking for? And then shut up and let them tell you.
Exactly. And I've seen people that have just talked over the whole time and the people just kind of wander away. So
and they frequently do.
Yeah, they frequently do. All right. So getting back onto first, who was the first person other than yourself that believed in you, and in what way did they believe in you?
I'm going to tell you a story, which I don't think I've ever said out loud. I've written about it on my blog, but I was 12 years old, barely 12 years old. And I was in the hospital overnight for a flu bug thing. And the hospital administrator, and then my small town in Canada, the hospital administrator was also the mayor of our town. And Mr. Graham came in and we started chatting, and he said, what do you do? What do you read? And he's the one that got me turned on to The Hobbit. He said, "You must read The Hobbit." And I went, "Well, isn't that kind of a grown-up book?" And he said, "Bosh." He had this great English accent. And he said, "You must read The Hobbit." And I said, "Yeah, I think authors are cool. I'd like to be an author." And a few hours later, he came back and he gave me, and it's too far away to reach, he gave me a paperback Roget's Thesaurus and said, "Every writer needs one of these." And this guy who had known me for all of 20 minutes gave me my first thesaurus and said, "Well, you should be writing then," and handed it to me. And that has always kind of stuck with me. I mean, obviously, my parents supported me, and everybody thinks I'm brilliant and blah blah blah. But I thought that was particularly impressive.
It is. And I think that even as adults now, it's important for us to remember, like, we could do those little things for somebody, another writer, or even a kid that's kind of interested. It's something small. They come up to your table and you give them the time of day. That could be the difference for them to going on to doing what they really want to do.
Well, it goes back to, bless their hearts, they're so impressed.
They are. Especially kids. Kids come up and their eyes get all big.
Yeah, but even adults, I'm a nobody, but they're looking at 6 books and they're going, I can't even imagine 6 books. That's amazing. And I have to not disillusion them, A, because I want to sell books, but also because, yeah, you can do this too.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So firsts are hard. I mean, that's reality. When you do something for the first time, it's hard. And often we feel like, the glitches that come through are a reflection of us versus just learning the process.
Sure.
So when you're looking at firsts and you've done something for the first time, how did you deal with saying to yourself, like, say you did a first and it was terrible, and it happens. How do you say to yourself, I still need to push on, I need to try again?
I think, well, it's funny because I'm going through this now. After I finished the latest Johnny Lycan book, which kind of ends the trilogy, I was like, what do I want to do next? And I was kind of burned out on novels. And I went back to screenplays. And so I've spent the last 9 months or so, I've got 2 feature screenplays and 2 short films that I've written, which is an immense amount of fun. But I don't know if anybody's going to read them. I don't know if they're ever going to see the light of day. I'm basically starting over again, in a whole new field. But I'm one of those people, this is the beauty of short attention spans, is that it bothers me that I'm going to die without learning everything. I know that it's true.
It's a given.
But I will do my best to fight it. And so I'm just endlessly curious, and I'm endlessly trying. And there are things that I think are within my wheelhouse. I'm not training with my 1 soon to be 2 bionic knees to climb Mount Everest. Right? But I can write a screenplay. It might suck, but to get 97 pages of stuff, I can do that, right? Whether it's any good is a fair question, but I'm tackling things that are within the realm of possibility, even if they are a stretch. And to me, that's what keeps my brain sharp. It's what keeps me interested. And you can tell people who are like this. I can't tell you how many times I've been in a conversation with somebody and a question comes up. Who was the first person that did that? And the first thing I do is I go to my phone and I punch in and I find the answer, right? They are perfectly content to wander the rest of their lives without knowing the answer to that question. It's reachable. The sum knowledge of the universe is right here in the palm of your hand. How can you not look up the answer?
Yeah, just Google it. People ask questions, you're like, do you not have a computer?
Auntie Google knows everything. She is very smart.
This is, yep. I totally can relate to that one. So kind of talking about the first verse, and like they're awkward and they're weird and they're hard, but sometimes they're funny. So do you have like a funny first, something you did that didn't turn out the way you wanted to, but you laughed it off and it actually helped you grow?
Yes. When I decided I wanted to do stand-up, it was the year I graduated high school. It was 1979. It was the beginning of the comedy club boom. People were just having heard of the Comedy Store and all these different places. And I lived well out of Vancouver in the boonies. And so I got it in my head. I had been laid up in a cast for several weeks watching late night television and thought, I understand how this works. And so I went to the only local bar that had live entertainment, and I BS'd my way into doing a set. And it was beyond awful.
Oh, no.
It was horrible beyond words. a lesser or at least a more sane person would have said, well, this is the stupidest thing ever. But instead, it drove me on, and I started driving from Mission to Vancouver to a real comedy club, Punchlines Comedy Club, where I could do this in front of audiences who wanted to see comedians. And I only had to do 5 minutes, and if it was awful, I'd be back the next night. And so that, and I cringe now to think of how horrible it was. But it didn't stop me because I wanted to do that. And so, yeah, first time, that was really awful. Let's not do that again.
Definitely. We definitely learn from the awfulness too, how to do it better. So I'm curious, do you still do stand-up comedy or?
Oh God, no.
No.
God,
so
no.
how many years did you do that for?
I did it for, depending on how you count, about 18, 19 years.
Oh, wow.
And in 91, I moved to LA to be a big star. And that's a 3-beer conversation that we could have some time. And it didn't work out. And I had a wife and a child by then. I met my wife when I moved to LA. And, clearly I was not going to be a big star, and the bills were this high and the money was this high. So I had to join the real world. And my last set that I ever did was May 6th, 1996. And I know that because the next day I started my full-time training job. Because I had never had a day job at the beginning of my career because I was in college during the first couple of years. And then I was kind of making enough money to survive. And so it wasn't until the end of my career that I needed a day job. But when I got my first full-time training job and realized this was going to be my career, I needed to just drop the foolishness and do it. So, but it's funny because people say to me all the time, would you go back to it? Hell no. First of all, the business is a hellscape. People are getting paid now what they were getting paid in 1984.
Oh,
yeah. The money has actually gotten worse in the business unless you're a big star. The business is different, right? It's all about Facebook followers and how many people follow you on TikTok and all that stuff. And it's just a sleazy, stupid business for grownups to be in. When you're a guy in your 20s, being on the road all the time, being in bars every night, all that stuff has its advantages, truth be told. As a grownup, you just can't do that anymore.
Yeah.
But it's funny because people ask me now, well, why don't you write a comedy? To me, writing a flat out comedy screenplay is my worst nightmare, because I have been around long enough to know there's very little on this earth that's worse than telling a joke and having it fall flat. And I have seen so many really funny comics that get their first movie always bother me because occasionally they hit, but their second movie is always terrible. And it is physically painful for me to watch.
Yeah.
The notion of writing 250 pages of something that I think is funny and having them tell me no.
Yeah.
I am too old for that. My blood pressure cannot handle that anymore.
Yeah, and I think the media matters. Like, I love John Mulaney. I think he's really funny, but like his TV show was terrible. Terribly. We tried to watch it. We were like, no. Great at stand-up.
His Saturday Night, any episode he's on Saturday Night Live is instantly worth watching. His stand-up is brilliant. And I agree with you.
Yeah.
The problem is that comedy is based on surprise.
Mm.
I'm about to get on my soapbox now.
Please do.
Comedy is based on surprise. And the minute people are onto the shtick, it's not a surprise anymore.
Right.
So the people Robin Williams had to constantly be trying different things, and some of them worked and some of them didn't, but he had to constantly keep trying certain things, right? You can only see, Ace Ventura And Jim Carrey, who started at the same time I did in stand-up, I knew Jim. After a while, you're on to his act.
Right.
And it ceases to be as funny. And when you give a comic a TV show,
it's too scripted.
Fawlty Towers did it brilliantly. They gave John Cleese 2 seasons, 3 seasons maybe, and said, that's it, you're done. And that's the right answer.
Yeah, that's spot on. I agree. And I think that's why I was asking if you weaved in comedy, because there's a difference between weaving in something you're good at and just doing it in that kind of forum. So
there's a difference between humor and comedy. Comedy says, this is funny.
Right.
Humor is just funny, and it's often an adjunct to the main thing. Like, humor is an inherent part of somebody's personality. Right?
I agree.
There's an opening joke in Johnny Lycan. It's about 4 pages in. Johnny has been a werewolf. He's fighting Russian gangsters as a werewolf. He's ready to make his escape, and he's confronted with a doorknob. And he's got hands the size of hams with 7-inch nails, and he can't open the door.
That's awesome. I like that.
Right? You're smiling because that's humor. That comes out of the situation. It doesn't say, hey, let me tell you a werewolf joke.
Right.
And so that's the difference. I have now, and I'm old enough now to call myself a humorist instead of a comedian. It's like, I've reached the age where I'm now a curmudgeon and not just an obnoxious jerk. Age has its privileges. But humor, I think, will always be a part of what I write, because it's a part of who I am. But comedy just puts it right out there and says, you're going to laugh. And people have heard me say this before, and I get a sideways glance when I say it, so prepared to look sideways. The 2 things that reveal the most about your personality are what you laugh at and the porn you watch. And the reason that I say that is they are very similar. If somebody says, this book was really hot and sexy, and I read it and it wasn't hot and sexy, I will judge you as a result of that. It's the same thing when you say, this is the funniest thing I've ever seen. Well, it's the funniest thing you've ever seen. Comedy is incredibly subjective. It is circumstantial and contextual. And again, another lecture for another day. But just because you laugh at it doesn't mean I will.
Right.
It is incredibly revealing. And if you've ever laughed at something completely inappropriate, you have revealed a part of yourself that maybe you didn't intend to reveal.
Yep. Definitely. So are you like the person that does something first, or do you like watch other people do it, make sure they don't fail, and then try it? Or you like, I'm assuming you just try it because obviously you were a comedian, which takes a lot of guts to be able the first person to just get up there and do something.
I am usually the second or third person to try something.
Okay.
Somebody will do something and I'll go, maybe I'll try that. When I was really early in my grown-up career, I had like one of the very first business podcasts. It was 6 months after the word podcast was invented. This is like 2006, 2007, somewhere back there. And I had a podcast called The Cranky Middle Manager Show. And I actually developed a pretty good audience. And I was listed as one of the top HR leadership podcasts. Well, of course, there were only 5 of us back then. So I knew that they existed. A couple of people had gone over the hill and taken the bullets. And I went, okay, I'll try this. And I will do what this person did. And I'm not going to do that. So I am usually early in the parade, but I am not the first one over the hill, if that makes sense.
That does make sense, because that's me too. I'll do it now because sometimes it irritates me when like nobody will step up and be like, fine, I'll do it. because I get irritated. But like if I have the choice, I'll usually watch a few people go first and kind of see what did and didn't work, and then I'll go forward. So yeah, I totally agree with that. Now, what is the first you'd rather forget?
The first I would rather forget. Oh gosh. I think the first it's definitely has to do with my social life. The first time I went to ask a girl out, there was a girl in 7th grade who I had a big old crush on. And I put it off and put it off and put it off. And then something was coming that I could bring somebody to. And I thought, this is perfect. And I went to her house and she had moved.
Oh, no.
Yep. So to this day, she will never know that all of this could have been hers.
That's a good one. You're the first person that didn't say their first marriage. That's good.
No. That one, no, there was a first marriage, but that one, I would, given where I was in my life, I would probably do the same stupidity again. The good news is that the second time I got it right.
Me too.
And so, 30, help Mr. Wizard, 32 years later, here we are,
That's awesome. That's good. So here's a question, and this is really, it's subjective to people. Or first, something like if they're bad and they're embarrassment, would you rather go back and erase them, or do you prefer to have them kind of in your history so that you can reflect back and learn off of that?
Oh, they're totally in my history. And I will give you a very short answer to what is an incredibly long answer. All my life, I wanted to be on Jeopardy. Oh. I was really good at trivia. People said, "Oh, you're really smart. You should be on Jeopardy." By the way, there is no direct correlation between being smart and being on Jeopardy. It's how you process information. This is a long way of saying in 1994, I finally got the chance to be on Jeopardy. And I died a horrible, ugly car crash, steaming dumpster fire death. I was leading halfway through Double Jeopardy. I got both Double Jeopardy questions wrong and the final question and wound up with $0.
Yep.
But there is, and someday, when we have a 3-hour show, there is a direct line between losing on Jeopardy and being where I am today, lessons learned and different things. But would I do it again? I never want to be on Jeopardy again, but I'm really glad I did it.
Right.
I sit on my couch and I tape every episode and I watch and my wife and dog think I'm a genius. If I had the chance to go on it again, would I? I doubt it, because I still have scars from 1994. But I'm really glad I did it, and it makes a great story.
It does make a great story. That's actually really awesome. I love Jeopardy, but I know I'd never go on it because I know I would just freeze. I'd be like, so. Yeah,
it's an incredible experience is all I can say. And like I say, I've got, the full story is about a 3-hour multi-beer
I'm trying to look you up because we watch the old ones because Pluto TV shows all the old, like a lot of old Jeopardies. I don't know if you've ever seen, but
well, so if it shows any from March 1994,
I'm gonna have to look. Yeah, I'm gonna look you up. I want to see how this goes. All right. Well, we're done with the question part. I'm going to present the wheel, which is the first time for everything wheel, and then we'll let it spin and we'll see what it comes up with. So hold on one second and let me present.
Okay.
Let's see. Here we go. Share. Okay, I'm going to spin. You can see the wheel, right?
Oh, look at you. Oh, this is very fancy. This is high-tech stuff.
Let's give it a spin and see what it comes up with. And I put myself on the hot seat for these two. So, first job. So what was your first job?
My first job, depending on how you define job, I started babysitting when I was 13. So, I babysat and looked after kids and all that good stuff. My first job where I actually, and I worked various summer jobs with my dad and whatever. But the first job where I went in, asked for a job, and got a paycheck was cooking chicken at Brownie's Fried Chicken in Mission, BC.
Oh my gosh.
Yes. And so I would go to school all day. I would go to Brownie's after school. I would cook chicken and wash pots and do all that good stuff. And then, go to school the next day. But that actually helped me as a writer because I still write this way. What I would do is I would write my essays in my head while I was scrubbing pots, so that when I sat down to write, it was basically transcribing what I'd already written. And I still write that way.
Me too. Yep.
Like I'll formulate the chapter in my head. And then when I sit down to actually write 2,000, 3,000 words takes me very little time. But it's taken me a week and a half to get to those.
Right. To work out.
Right?
Yeah, I want to do that. No, I don't want to do that. That works. That doesn't. I do the exact same thing. So yeah, I write really quickly when I write, but so much is in my head all the time. So very cool. My first job, same thing. I babysat and I worked for family. My first job where I went and applied for a job was an ice cream shop in the mall. It was amazing. Nice. Ice cream all day. I lasted about a week because I realized that the owner, it was a male owner, and he would, the guys were always making the ice cream and the girls served, but he would often tell the girls to go up on ladders to grab stuff off the top shelf. And what I realized was he also made us wear skirts. And so I quit that job.
As a guy, I spend an inordinate amount of my time just going, I wasn't at the meeting where they made that decision. I wasn't at the meeting. Nobody asked me. I'm sorry, but I wasn't there.
Yeah. So yeah, that was my first job, and yeah, I could stand to forget that. All right, let's spin the wheel again. Let's see.
Oh wait, there's more.
I did it a few times. Yeah.
Okay, cool.
Let's see what we get this time. Ooh, first trip.
First trip, I am going to say, because that's a hard one. To me, it's the first time I got on a plane by myself, right, is what I consider my first trip. I was on student exchange, and I couldn't afford to go on student exchange out of the country. So there was something called Exchange Canada. And I went from BC to Elliott Lake, Ontario, which is in Northern Ontario, hometown of Allanthick. In the middle of February. I have never been so cold in my life. But I got on a plane and flew out of Vancouver, got to Elliott Lake, spent a month in Elliott Lake, went to school there for a month, and then came home. And that was probably my first trip, and I was 15.
Oh, wow. Yeah, my first trip, and we traveled a lot as a kid. My mother loved to travel, and she would stick us on a plane to go to my grandma's house by ourselves. So my first trip that I remember, though, like where I was, like we stayed at a hotel, and I kind of remember a trip, is we actually went to Wilmington, from Rochester, New York to Wilmington, North Carolina. We stayed in a hotel on the beach. It was amazing. We were actually moving there. I didn't know it because I was 5 at the time, but my stepfather was applying for a job with IBM, and we were going to be moving there. But I remember it just being like really magical because we could sit there and eat ice cream, like, because there was a cafe, and we'd sit there and then look out at the ocean. And I'm from Long Island, so I'm from the ocean, but there was just something different about the ocean in Wilmington. And it still sticks in my head to this day.
Right.
All right. We'll do one more spin. Let's see. Oh. All right. First memory.
Okay. You are going to think that I am lying because I was 2.5.
I believe it.
But I have a flash, and it's a very brief flash of John Kennedy's funeral. And what I remember is sitting on the floor, looking at the round TV screen with the horses carrying the thing. And my youngest sister was in a box. She was 10 days out of the hospital. So she was in that cardboard bassinet, and my mother on the couch weeping.
Oh, wow.
And that moment of the picture on the screen and my mother crying has stuck with me. And whether that's a manufactured memory, whether you know,
Right.
but it feels real as hell. So I guess that's it.
That's cool. Yeah, I was wondering when I was going to put up first memory what people would have. And like I have some flash memories, like, you know, I remember being like really little and kind of standing by like my mother was in the shower and I wanted to talk, like wanted to be with her. So I was there and like I remember stuff like that. But like the first memory I have is actually jumping up and down in my crib because my mother put me in there and she left. And I was probably like 1.5, maybe going on 2. She left the room and I was jumping up and down in the crib and the bottom fell out. And I started screaming and she ran in and she was like, Julie, that's what she called me.
And thus began a life of dredging up trauma.
Right. So that's my first memory. But we're done with the wheel, and I'd love to have you tell the audience a little bit about where they can find you again, maybe any events that you have upcoming, anything you'd like to let them know.
Yeah, you bet. So I am not hard to find. WayneTurmel.com is my website for my fiction world. I'm on Twitter, WTurmel. May 2nd is the official launch date of the 3rd and final Johnny Lycan book, Johnny Lycan and the Last Witchfinder, which means if you are a Facebook person, I'm doing a Facebook Live event on Wednesday, May 1st at 5 o'clock Pacific time. This could be cool or it could be a complete car wreck because I've never done a Facebook Live, but I'm going to answer questions and read from the book and do give away some prizes. And it's going to be a lot of fun. So you can find me on Facebook. Wayne Turmel is my personal page. Wayne Turmel Author is where you find me for author stuff. And like I say, May 2nd is the date. So if you're one of those people who doesn't read a series until it's done because George Martin has scarred you for life, it's safe. You can pre-order the 3rd Johnny Lycan book and you can read the first 2 and be ready when May 2nd happens. So there you go.
Well, thank you so much for being on the show. It's really been a pleasure talking to you and getting to know you. I really appreciate it.
You need to raise the bar on what makes you happy, but I'm thrilled.
I'm pretty simple.
Thank you.
I'm pretty simple. And to our audience, thank you so much for tuning in. We really appreciate you listening in, and please consider giving us a like. And as always, it's time for Go Indie Now. Thank you very much.